welcome everybody to what is most likely our last Café Scientifique for the year. Oh, I know. I did try to line one up for November. I had a speaker who said, oh, can I please speak in November? And I said, yeah, sounds good. What date suits you? And he said, how does the 15th of December sound? And I thought, well, that's not really November. Could you pick a date actually in November? And he said, let me get back to you. And that's been a few weeks now. So let's assume that he's now going to speak sometime in 2021. Before we get started, got some various news. So first of all, the Royal Society have announced that they have selected their new chief executive, Professor Cindy Kiro, who is currently the TBC Māori at the University of Auckland, and I believe she'll start up the role in early 2021. The Royal Society have appointed, once again, talking about the Royal Society, have appointed 3 new companions, Dr. Sir Timothy Karetu, Professor Christine Jasoni, and Rauri Kirikiri. No doubt, if you just Google, you'll find the details, or head to our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Auckland Museum Institute, and we've posted the press release there. Otherwise, almost all of this information is also, if you're not on Facebook, it is on the Royal Society website. Some positive little news. Dr. Ali Seyfuddin, who was part of the panel for our cannabis talk at the Café Scientifique in August, which was about 4 years ago by the feeling of things. Now, I'm not saying that the Café Scientifique was what pushed it over the line, but you know, from the 1st of January, he's going to now be an associate professor. So that's good for him. Well done on the promotion. And just a reminder to potential Café speakers that it doesn't have any promotion applications. Unless you're already a professor, in which case, well, actually, we'll get to that in a second. The next item on my list is that the Auckland Museum Institute AGM is Tuesday, the 8th of December, so mark that one in your diaries. If you're a member, you no doubt will have had a couple of emails or about to get emails or something like that. My inbox is full of emails, so I'm sure there's one in there somewhere. And before I forget, if you don't already, follow us on social media. We have a Facebook page. We're also on YouTube. We pop up copies of our talks there. And of course, you know that they're good talks because you're here already. And our speaker for tonight, Dr. Lorna Piatti-Farnell, is giving another talk next week. If you enjoyed tonight and you want more of her, if you didn't enjoy tonight, and if you didn't enjoy tonight and you want to redo, either way, her talk is next week, her inaugural professorial address, which is entitled The Meaning of Fun, Storytelling and Identity in Popular Culture. Professor Lorna Piatti-Farnell will share insights from her research on the importance of popular culture, exploring the power held by seemingly common entertainment practices to produce significant cultural meaning. It's Tuesday from 4:30 till 5:30 AUT in City Campus. If you can't make it in person, I understand they're live streaming it. Registration details are all online. If you just Google it, there's a thing you fill in, and then they make sure that there's going to be enough food catered for you to come. Cater if it's good, make sure you go.
It's a special one. It's special.
Oh, well, it's about me, so obviously it is very special.
And probably not poisonous. I mean,
only metaphorically, really, you know.
And on the note of promotion, so when Lorna initially agreed to come to a cafe for us, she was a professor, and then we announced that she was going to do a cafe for us, and then she was promoted to professor. So just like
last year.
Yeah, it's for all the potential cafe speakers out there.
Take note.
Take note, and chat me afterwards. So, tonight's cafe, finally getting there. I've only been talking for 5 minutes. So, tonight's speaker, Dr. Lorna Piatti-Farnell is a professor of cultural history at Auckland University of Technology. Her research focuses primarily on the history of popular icons, from food to vampires and superheroes, and how these reflect our identities and the ways we live at a particular moment in time. She's published widely on these topics and is currently working on her next book, entitled Insidious Matters, A Cultural History of Poison. She's written books on just about everything, from a cultural history of poison to the Lord of the Rings fans, to vampires in contemporary popular literature, to global histories of bananas and beef. Now those are separate books, but I'm sure a joint book would be
Oh, that's an idea. Thank you for
would
that.
be interesting. In 2012, she founded the Gothic Association of New Zealand and Australia, GAMSA, for which she is also currently serving as president. At AUT, she has been the director of the Popular Culture Research Centre since 2014. In her spare time, Lorna loves discussing cult films and TV shows, watching Japanese anime, reading fantasy horror novels, and collecting historical artifacts. She waits eagerly to celebrate Halloween every year. So, without further ado, tonight's Café, Poison Beauty. The quest for beauty has been at the heart of the human experience for millennia. That quest, however, has also been entangled with poison, as many cosmetics, fashion items, and fanciful objects have relied on the use of toxic substances to achieve their desired effects. From ancient lead-based makeup to 21st century botox, the history of the beauty industry is, to some extent, the history of poison. Without further ado, please bring your hands together and welcome our speaker, Lorna Piatti-Farnell.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Scott, for a very generous introduction. I also take this opportunity to thank Scott on behalf of the Auckland Museum Institute for inviting me to give this presentation. Over a year ago now, we've had a few, well, disruptions this year, shall we say, but finally we're all here, and I'm really grateful for you giving up your time and coming to listen to me talk a little bit about one of my favorite subjects and dinner topics, poison. So let's get straight into it. I'm a notes person, so I've got my trusty notes here. And I would like to say by saying that when we say the word poison, we're probably, all imagining different things. There are different ideas, different images that pop into our mind. And they're probably, dependent on our experiences, our histories, on what we love and what we don't like so much as well. But a certain universality to the concept of poison perhaps lies in the idea that when we use that term, we very rarely mean something positive. Poison has a dark connotation to it, a little bit of a dark imagination to it, if you will, as well. Poison is something that more often than not, when it's touched or ingested, will do harm. We very rarely take it willingly, and when we do take it unknowingly, whoever has slipped it to us, chances are, had nefarious intentions. So the term comes with a lot of baggage, and we won't get too much into it, but we'll keep that idea in the background, that as soon as we say poison, we are probably imagining bottles, dark bottles with mysterious and insidious contents. And we will see tonight that actually when we talk about poison, most of the time, rose by any other name, we're actually referring to a lot of substances that make up our everyday existence. So we'll see a little bit about that. So that is the suggestion that to me serves as a starting point tonight, that poison is entangled with our everyday lives. It really is everywhere. It's where we don't want it to be, but sometimes it's really where we want it to be, with uses that are not quite what the wider imagination may bring, when we say the word. Toxic substances are entangled with our everyday lives, from medicine to food to recreation, and we will see tonight a little bit to cosmetics. Now, as a footnote, I'm not a toxicologist, although I dabble. No, I don't. I'm not a toxicologist, I'm not a pharmacologist, I'm not a chemist, I'm a historian. So my interest in poison is in exploring how deadly substances, what are truly deadly substances, have had an impact on our cultures or on our identities, on how we see ourselves and others at a particular moment in time. So I'm particularly interested in how the connotations of something as poison, the poison label, as I like to call it, comes with so many associations, so many ideas, which sometimes can be cross-cultural, and a lot of the times are profoundly tied to a specific context, a specific sociocultural group, and how they operate at a particular moment in time. I will particularly like to communicate tonight that when we talk about poison, we are talking not necessarily about just substances that kill. That is a little bit reductive. If we just say that poison is something that kills, we're not quite capturing its multifaceted nature. We will see that poison is more something about need, about context, about usage, or as many have claimed, including famously Paracelsus, but before and after him as well, poison, above all, is a matter of dosage. But we'll see if that's true. You know, how much poison can we actually take before we regret it? All right, so today I want to focus particularly on the relationship between poison, in inverted commas, in the broader sense, and cosmetics and beauty products in general, and a little bit of fashion as well, because why not? It sounds exciting, right? It's exciting to me, but I don't get out much. I'm always at home reading about poisons, so, you know, you'll excuse me. So this is not just because I find it fascinating, you know, to talk about poison and cosmetics, which a lot of the time are two ideas that don't seem to go together, you know, but we'll see that perhaps they do. But because it is an area of cultural practice where the lines, the definitions between one and the other are actually quite blurred. And we'll see how they're blurred, to what extent, and how we all feel about, you know, that blurring to some extent. Now, there are lots of instances, cross-century, cross-cultural, transnational, about the mixture between poison, again in inverted commas, or toxic substances, if you will, and the idea of cosmetics. I've just selected a few tonight, you know, some instances that I find particularly interesting, but also I've chosen them because they have played a very important part in our popular imagination. And you might recognize some of them and go, oh, yeah, you know, we've always talked about that. But also the examples I've chosen to discuss with you tonight are very well cemented in our histories and our cultures, so much so that it's really difficult, once we consider them, to take away the idea of need and usage in relation to poison. So I'm going to take, this is the footnote, the caveat, what do you want to call it? Disclaimer. That's good, the disclaimer. We'll call it a disclaimer. I'm going to take tonight a slightly Euro, North American-centric perspective. Particularly because I'm quite interested in popular icons. I like to talk about and see what people think about ideas that are everywhere in our everyday. We see in film, we see in documentaries, but I want us to think about it a little bit more. So that's why. But I'm hoping that by taking that Euro, North America-centric perspective, that is just a starting point, and we can expand, and we can look at other cultures and other histories and other nations and bring us all together under the wonderful label of poison. That's not something you get to say every day, so I'm very excited about that. All right, so let's start with the color red, that famous poison thing, and the use of something called Cinnabar. Not cinnamon, although they do look similar once they're ground up, and they do have a similar etymological root, although I beg you not to mix them up. Well, I'm not here to judge. Anyway, so Cinnabar, just list that, you know, like from the simple things. Cinnabar is a dark orange to dark red mineral. It can be found really across the globe, from Asia to Europe, to a variety of locations in Central and South America. So it's a little bit of a global mineral, if you will. Now, in ancient times, as broad a designation as that is in the whole of ancient times. But in ancient times, and for quite a few centuries afterwards, Cinnabar was customarily ground up to make a powder and used in order to use a pigment that later became known as vermilion. So Cinnabar is the mineral at the base of this very particular and very widely used hue pigment, if you wish. Now, this was extremely popular in paint, in art, and as decoration, but also, as we will see, as a colorful addition to cosmetics. And as a footnote, there are lots of examples of Cinnabar-colored boxes, lacquer boxes, particular, you know, like historically in China. You might see them a really bright, dark red, almost blood, ox blood red, and they're lacquered, and they're beautiful, and they're absolutely, you know, really, really stunning. And we will see what's behind the beauty which tends to be something that happens quite a lot. Never trust beauty, it will always come to bite you. Hello. I'm such a cynic. Anyway, Cinnabar is, because he's still found and still the same, not only extremely beautiful and appealing in color, but also extremely toxic. Now, the mineral form of cinnabar is also known as mercury sulfide or mercuric sulfide, depending. Now, mercury poisoning, so we're getting straight into it, getting to the good stuff straight away. Mercury poisoning, if you are so unfortunate to experience it, can result in serious damage to nervous system, muscular system, as well as damage to the gastrointestinal tract and respiratory system. So that's all of us, really. We touched all of it. So bottom line is, if you get mercury poisoning, it's not a good night for anybody, right? So don't get mercury poisoning. But some people did, and it was because of cinnabar. So how did people get in touch with cinnabar so much to get poisoned by it? Now, one of the most prominent uses for cinnabar, this brilliantly red, mineral, in cosmetic was as the base for rouge. Now, the latter was a red powder, later on also marketed and sold as a paste, but mainly a powder that would be applied, that was used as a cosmetic color for cheeks. A little bit like the precursor to our current blusher, although a little bit more toxic, maybe. I don't know. Now, rouge was a staple in many centuries in European, Middle Eastern, even Asian cosmetics, in a lot of incarnations and a lot of ways. But one of the things that stayed at the core of that is that the main ingredient was this mercuric compound known as cinnabar. Now, evidence of rouge, although not called rouge, obviously, that's a French word that came, like at the end of the 17th century. But evidence of rouge being used in Europe can be found as early as Greco-Roman times. In Roman society, as it had been in ancient Greece, they didn't think much of makeup, and particularly the male opinion, and use that term in inverted commas as the Romans would have seen it, the male opinion on makeup was that, it was predominantly negative. Right? But one of the things that was really popular was the association between rosy cheeks and health. So cinnabar found a fantastic use then, because it will be used to bestow upon fashionable Roman ladies that sort of healthy rosy cheeks glow. That became very fashionable very quickly. Now the toxicity of cinnabar, and it is highly toxic because it's a mercury compound, was well known to the Romans. Absolutely. We were very aware of it. But this did not hinder its popularity. Ovid and Plutarch, among others, really didn't have many good things to say about the use of cinnabar. And they would, Ovid in particular wrote with a mixture of spite and concern that fashionable women's cheeks were, and I quote, liberally adorned with poisonous compounds. Of course, Roman historians were never very precise. So I am guessing he meant cinnabar, makeup, but, they didn't give us much to go on, Let's assume. This likely referred, to cinnabar pigments, which were discussed in other areas, particularly at the time, as well as minium, which was another mineral, also known as red lead. So mercury lead is going really well here. That would be applied, to the face to get that rosy cheek look. Now, while the use of makeup, for a number of reasons, which we won't go into, sort of fell out of popularity in Europe during the Middle Ages, it sort of had a little bit of it made a forceful reappearance, shall we say, during the Renaissance, throughout the Renaissance, and then well into the early modern era. Cinnabar-laden rouge returned to vogue, especially in England and France, from the 16th century onwards, reaching its flamboyant apogee in the 18th century. Where red pummels on the cheeks would be the height of fashion. Couldn't leave. It's better than MasterCard. Don't leave your house without it. You couldn't see it. So, and you might have seen there are quite a lot of satirical illustrations from the 18th century with these fashionable ladies of the time with heavily coiffured hair and wigs and these really bright, pummeled, cheeks, that really stood out. So they were a little bit the center of ridicule as much as they were seen as fashionable in certain circles. But being mercury-based, Cinnabar continued to be incredibly toxic. But the makers of cosmetics, or the users of cosmetics for that matter, didn't really care about that because it was fashionable, it looked good, it ticked the box, it did the job. It was also widely available. It was a lot cheaper to use Cinnabar, even though it was toxic, because it could be mined in a number of areas, like around the world, that could be then brought back to Europe, as opposed to other substitutes, which was safer, like cochineal, which is derived from a beetle. I guess it's organic, right? So we'll take that. But those were a lot more expensive, so Cinnabar continued to be the choice. Now, by the time the mid-19th century arrived, concerns over the negative health effects of Cinnabar were widely discussed. So much so that there were entire pamphlets where, sort of authorities of the time warned makeup users to apply caution as much as they applied their rouge. Like he hadn't done in Roman times, it didn't seem to deter many, and the use of Cinnabar continued on. In fact, it was only banned in Europe. The use of what was then called the vermilion rouge pigment was not banned in Europe and North America until the early 20th century. So it's relatively recent in our history that we've actually banned a cosmetic compound that actually, we will see in a minute, caused a lot of health issues for many. So in conjunction with red, from red, let's move on to white. Seem to have a little bit of a color guide tonight, so why not? Now let's move on to lead, which is fun. It's fun for everyone. Mercury and lead often go together in cosmetics. Now lead has a long and alarming history as a makeup ingredient. It's been there for a long time, and it took a very long time to disappear. And to some extent, there are some cosmetics that still use lead compounds today, even though they've got fancy names and you never know. It always looks like something else. Now, one of lead's most common uses in cosmetic was as the base for whitening powders. Now, between the 14th and 19th century, so we're talking about quite a long, time historical spectrum. Especially beauty standards for women in Europe dictated that the ideal complexion should be a pale one. Evidence of this is also present in other areas, of course, not just Europe, but particularly in Asia, but we're focusing on Europe anyway. So in answering this, in the pursuit of the ideal pale face beauty, some of the beauty treatments that the ladies resorted to from the Renaissance onwards were rather deadly. And the reason why they were deadly is because they would use ingredients that would slowly poison the body. We have evidence of various mixtures being used to bleach and whiten the skin, sometimes on a superficial level, some of the times, with the idea of actually making it permanent. You can imagine, the damage that would do. These included lead and white vinegar, as well as poultices made of mercury and turpentine. Imagine that. But it was not hard to imagine, during the late Renaissance, when clearly, if you wanted to be fashionable, the turpentine you had to go for. Now, these concoctions truly were extremely poisonous, and once they were applied to the skin, the damage would be extensive. Now, people who used the lead-based or mercury-based whitening powders, which had a similar outcome and different ways of poisoning, but still poisoning, that's what they did. They slowly poisoned themselves. They suffered side effects, quite broad side effects, from premature graying of hair to dry out and spotty skin, abdominal pain, difficulty breathing, and if the use was long enough, eventual death. Now, an avid user, it's always good to mention a couple of famous people. Let's do the celebrity talk. Now, an avid user of lead and mercury whitening powder was famously Elizabeth I, Queen Elizabeth I, right? And you might have seen the paintings where she always had these ghostly, chilling white faces, and it was the fashion of the time, so she would be portrayed wearing that. But she was particularly avid, and the reason is historical for her, not only just for fashion. She'd had smallpox in her youth, which had left visible scars on her face. The Queen was very self-conscious about it, so she resorted to the cosmetic procedures of the time to try and obfuscate and obscure that. She was desperate to cover them up, and her beauty regime included the use of pig fat to even out her skin, and then the application of a variety of lead-based and mercury-based whitening powder to sort of like smooth everything out. Now, contemporary sources of the time, and there are many of this, and they vary a little bit. Some are very detailed, some are quite summary. But what they do get to is that the Queen's skin, over time, from the usage of lead and mercury whitening powders, actually paradoxically went quite grey. So the Queen was stuck in a little bit of a vicious cycle. She wanted to cover up her skin, so she would put on mercury and lead powders. But then they made her skin go grey, so then she would put on more whitening and lead powder, and the cycle went on. She was not the only one who was in this predicament, of course. Any fashionable lady at the time who wanted to indulge in whitening skin powders would go through the same fate. Now, some also speculate, this is a little speculation, but I'm going to put it here on the table and see how you feel about it. There is some speculation that her erratic behavior that she's often, that is often very talked about, was actually caused by lead and mercury poisoning. And the outbursts were an outcome of mercury in particular, which could cause tremors and other ailments. I don't know. I'll leave you to think about it. Maybe there's not enough evidence of that, but a lot of people at the time did actually report that whenever the Queen had been obsessively looking after her beauty regime, her behavior she always seemed to be in a worse mood. I don't know what we do with that, but we'll leave it there on the table to think about for later. Now, suffice it to say that the Queen, like many fashionable ladies, slowly poisoned herself, whether she died from it or not, or whether there were actual, repercussions on her behavior is difficult to say. But what is certain that the constant daily application of lead and mercury whitening powders undoubtedly would cause a lot of the deterioration of health with a cumulative effect, which over time could actually cause death. Now, since we're currently looking at the Renaissance, which is always a fun time for poison, it's a shame tonight we can't talk about Lucretia, Borgia, another talk perhaps. It's all made up. She never did it, poor thing. But anyway, since we're talking about Renaissance and late Renaissance cosmetic practices, I would like to add a little bit of footnote about Belladonna. It seems impossible not to mention it, so we'll talk about that. Now, as we mentioned, the ideal beauty, female beauty, during the Renaissance and quite a lot into the early modern era was this very pale face with sort of like rosy cheeked and a high forehead. Sometimes they would pluck out their eyebrows even to give this idea of the high forehead and even shave a little bit of their hair. But one of the things that was also highly prized as part of that beauty ideal was this vulnerable, doe-eyed look in the eyes, which we sometimes see in a lot of paintings from the time, especially the ones from Bronzino, which my art teacher at school always called as the vacant ladies of the Renaissance period. I don't think that's very kind, so we won't repeat that, but we have. You would have been very proud about that. So anyway, so this doe-eye appearance, was really highly prized. So in order to achieve that, the fashionable ladies of the time would actually ingest drops of Belladonna, Atropa Belladonna, its full name is, also known as deadly nightshade. Now, as soon as something is called deadly nightshade, nothing good can come out of it. And its name is deserved. Now, Atropa Belladonna, more colloquially for those who know it, is a plant, and it does have a lot of can have a lot of effects on the body. We'll talk about that in a little bit more. But one of the things that it does, it actually affects the nervous system, and particularly it affects the contraction of the pupils in the eyes. So taking belladonnas would permanently leave your pupils dilated. And so it would give this would allow the ladies to achieve that doe-eyed, vulnerable, sort of like wistful look that was so highly prized at the time, so much so that we see it in art as well. Now, tropobelladonna is extremely poisonous, toxic, you know, like, don't take it. You know, like, well, it does have an illustrious career in being used in cosmetics, but it also has a very illustrious career in being used as an actual poison to kill people, you know, in assassinations and whatever. So the fact that we see that they would be willing to take drops of something that they knew could be killing, you know, like, and would kill, actually testifies to the idea that when we talk about poison, it is a matter of context, it is a matter of usage, and it's a matter of need. Now, let's go back a little bit to whitening powders and sort of like draw to a conclusion, because I could talk forever, you know, like, honestly, and you guys don't deserve that. You deserve better. You deserve me to stop at some point. So in the 19th century, these whitening powders, the beauty industry actually realized that we could capitalize on whitening powders. So they started being commercially produced and commercially sold with names like the milk of the rose. I know, a very appealing name for something that was mainly based in lead and mercury and will slightly kill you. Now, in case you don't believe me that people did die from it, a little bit of an example from 1760. Maria was Countess of Coventry, and she was a very fashionable lady at the time, very fashionable figure, you know, of the time, a celebrity, shall we say, of the 18th century. And she died suddenly at the age of 27. At the time, the doctors all agreed that she had likely died of mercury and lead poisoning. She was an avid user of whitening powders and rouge. And it was known to everyone that she would be constantly ill. There are tales of her, you know, running away from parties because she had gastrointestinal issues, which we see as part of that rouge and white powder poisoning. But it was known that it was the cosmetic, so much so that in the mourning her, the press of the time actually said that she had died a victim of cosmetics. So there was absolutely no doubt that everyone was well aware of what was in these cosmetics, and everyone was well aware of how poisonous and deadly they could be. But it didn't stop anyone using them anyway. Now, we could go on here, and I could tell you about the arsenical lotions of the 19th century. Why not? Rub them on your skin. They will give you a youthful pallor. I could tell you about radium cosmetics from the early 20th century. They will give you an otherworldly glow. We could talk about the green pigments of the Victorian era, with wild, beautiful, huge dresses and wallpapers that would just be so fashionable and slowly killed you in your sleep as you inhaled the toxic fumes of arsenic. I could tell you about that. We could even talk perhaps about the Egyptians' use of coal, that maybe many believe to be spiritual, but perhaps it was medicinal. What we do agree on now was that it was extremely poisonous, because it was made of concoctions of galena powders and lead and other wonderful things, which slowly killed the unfortunate wearer. We could talk about that. We could talk about botox. I think we should really take ourselves off our 21st century superior pedestal and go, those crazy Victorians. We would never do that now. We have learned our lesson. It would appear that if we're prepared to inject botulism into our skin, perhaps we have not. So we could talk about all of that, but I shall stop there And I'm really keen on hearing what you have to say, your experiences, your knowledge. So I thank you so much for listening, and I am very grateful for such a captivating audience. Thank you so much.
So we're going to break for a couple of minutes to refill your drinks, and of course, if you would like, please if you would like to give us koha for running this event, Ray has our kite. Now I know there's a lot of people who turned up and then went,
Oh, how unfortunate.
then what you can always do is, we love you this time, and next time, bring more. And it's an incentive to remember to come to one of our cafes next year. Now, just a quick couple of little plugs. Don't forget, Lorna is presenting her inaugural professorial lecture next week. You can follow her on Twitter as Lorna.
Yes.
Lorna, there we go. Lorna. I was like, I had it memorized.
The lecture is free. Yeah.